The news website Axios is reporting that Israel has agreed to pause its airstrikes against Syrian government forces in southern Syria after facing pressure from the White House. Israel had been launching strikes in the city of Sueda after clashes between Bedouin tribes and the Druze religious minority there. Israel said it aims to protect the Druze and keep the area close to its own border demilitarized. Now, on Tuesday, the Syrian government in Damascus had sent troops to Sweida to restore order. But well into the evening, clashes and violent scenes continued.
Unprecedented scenes in Sueda. Syria's army and security forces deployed in the city's streets.
God is great. This is the center of Sueda. Tank Brigade, 42nd Division. This is the middle of Sueda.
Government forces were sent in after days of fierce sectarian violence between Sunni Bedouin tribes and the Druze minority. It was the first time the new government's forces fully entered Sueda. Until now, the city had managed its own security, relying on local Druze fighters to maintain order amid widespread distrust of a government largely dominated by Islamists. But after clashes killed dozens in the last 3 days, and reports of sectarian violence against the Druze community emerged, the Druze spiritual leadership said it caved to pressure from Damascus to allow the forces in. The Defense Ministry later announced that a ceasefire had been reached. Shortly afterward, Israel launched airstrikes against Syrian government forces in Sueda. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his country was acting to defend the Druze minority and to stop fighting near its border.
We've also been operating in Syria since this morning. We have a commitment to maintain southwest Syria as a demilitarized zone on the border of Israel. We'll not allow a return to a situation where a second Lebanon is being established for us there.
Dead and wounded from the clashes, as well as the Israeli airstrikes, were taken to a hospital outside the city.
We were entering Sweida to secure the civilians and prevent looting. I was on an armoured personnel carrier when the Israeli drone hit us. There are lots of casualties. Many young men were martyred.
Despite the ceasefire, fighting continued on the ground, raising fears that the conflict could descend further into sectarian violence.
And let's get more now. We're joined here in the studio by DW reporter Gazia Ohanes, who is from Syria, and she joins us now. So, I mean, a few days ago, we saw these violent clashes, right, between local groups, but now we have two national governments involved, Syria and Israel. How did we get here?
Locals in Sueda say they're living one of the darkest chapters of their history, and they say, you know, we didn't get here overnight. This has to do with a lot of built-up tensions between different sectarian groups and religious groups that exist in the region and also in the country. And the tensions are between the Bedouin Sunni tribes and the Druze community. And even the Druze within themselves are divided. And then there's the Sunni government that has interfered since yesterday, and the clashes have escalated since very quickly.
And the Syrian government is also involved. Tell us a little bit more about the role of the forces.
Right. So they only entered yesterday because before that, Syrian forces weren't allowed into Sueda. Sueda was in charge of its own security. And so when they were arriving, the scenes were quite unusual and striking for local residents there. There was a lot of fear. And they kept assuring people, you know, we're here to maintain security. But what happened right after that was that there were reports of serious violations, and that triggered a lot of clashes afterwards because a local religious leader released a statement and he called for armed action against the security forces. And then that's when Israel got involved again and there were more Israeli strikes. So the situation was very complicated and chaotic and escalating very quickly.
And what are you hearing from people on the ground? Because, I mean, I'm just looking at the figures that have been reported here. And, you know, apparently about half the people killed are Syrian government soldiers. On the other hand, some of the violence there is also attributed to their presence as well.
Right. So the situation is extremely difficult. Local journalists tell me that they're seeing bodies on the streets. Clashes are still ongoing. Civilian bodies are piling up, and that there's been arson attacks, there's been lootings, and there's also been a lot of security members, like you said, that have been killed because there's militia fighters, Druze fighters, that are also targeting them. And civilians are caught in the middle of all of this.
Give us a little bit more of the backstory, because we keep talking about the Druze, right? This is a semi-autonomous area, we have to say, within Syria. Who is this group? Explain their ties to Israel to us.
Druze are a minority in Syria. They're an offshoot of early Shia Islam. They have their own belief system. They're very secretive. And there's around 1 million Druze in the world, and the majority of them are in Syria. There are also Druze in Israel and in Lebanon. And even though they have the same sect, there's a lot of political differences between them. So the Druze in Israel are loyal to the state of Israel. Many of them serve in the IDF, even though they didn't have to. And the Druze in Syria the majority of them have a very different opinion to that. Now, what has been polarizing in this conflict is that one of the sheikhs that has been leading these Druze fighters is believed to be, now we don't have proof of this because it would be treason to be in contact with Israelis on the Syrian side. So he hasn't openly admitted it, but the Druze community widely believes that he's in contact with Israeli Druze members, and many of them speculate that that is why there were Israeli strikes soon after his statement was released as well.
The new government has promised to bring order to Syria, to bring some stability. I mean, there are still many questions, we have to say, which hang over the new government, but also a lot of challenges, aren't there, especially when it comes to security?
Right. The main criticism is that it is failing to hold its security members accountable for violations that have been committed, first in the coast, and now the members of the Druze community fear they're going to have the same fate, because weeks ago, Reuters released an investigation into the coastal massacres, the ones that occurred in May, and they said they established a line of command led all the way to the ministries of Syria. So the people in charge were directly under Syria's government, and they were not held to account. They're still serving under Syria's army. They're still part of Syria's forces. So without this accountability, there's going to be clashes because there's no trust from the minorities of the Syrian forces, and they're retaliating against them because of it, and is just fueling the cycle of violence.
And it's still a developing situation, we have to say, a very complicated one. So we thank you so much for joining us to put it all into a bit of context. DW's Gazia Ohanes, we appreciate it.